to be the second worst nuclear accident of all time. The Chernobyl disaster in the Soviet Union was at a level of 7 out of 7. That's pretty bad. 3 Mile Island, the worst nuclear accident in U.S. history, was a level 5 out of 7. ASN experts say, in their opinion, Fukushima is now at a level 6 out of 7, worse than 3 Mile Island. But what exactly does that mean?
That's not good.
You've probably heard of both 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, but do you remember exactly what happened? It was a long time ago, so I think it helps to refresh the facts here, and these are the facts. 3 Mile Island is a nuclear plant near Middletown, Pennsylvania, about 10 miles from Harrisburg. In March of 1979, the cooling system malfunctioned. The plant suffered a severe core meltdown, but it did not breach the containment structure. Some irradiated gas was vented from the plant, and pregnant women and children within a 5-mile radius were told to evacuate. On the 4th day, there were new false fears that a hydrogen bubble had formed and that it could cause the plant to explode, which caused widespread panic, understandably so. But experts quickly determined that an explosion wasn't scientifically possible. The size of the bubble was reduced and the crisis ended. No one was hurt or sickened. The Pennsylvania Department of Health kept a register of 30,000 potentially affected people, but luckily found no evidence of long-term health effects. Now, Chernobyl was totally different. Chernobyl was a nuclear facility in the Ukraine, part of the former Soviet Union, about 430 miles from Moscow. In April of 1986, a reactor exploded. The reactor had no emergency containment structure, which is insanity. As a result, it released more than 400 times more radioactive fallout than an atomic bomb. If you think about that, that is unbelievable. The explosion itself killed 2 workers. 28 emergency workers died within just 3 months, and that was mostly from acute radiation sickness. In the end, 200,000 people were evacuated and relocated entirely. More than 1 million people in 3 countries are on a national register as potentially affected by radiation. In fact, about 4,000 cases of thyroid cancer have been diagnosed in people who were exposed as children. Resettlement to the outermost containment areas began last year, almost a quarter century after the accident happened. So what will be the fallout of Fukushima? What will that be like? Obviously, there's a wide gulf between the severity of 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. So what are the long-term threats of radiation and contamination in this case? Well, my next guest can help answer those questions. Joining me now is nuclear reactor specialist Ken Bergeron. He did research on nuclear reactor accident simulation for Sandia National Laboratories in New Mexico. Well, let's start talking about where this lies between 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. I mean, they say 5 out of 7, 7 out of 7, and somewhere in between, but there's a huge gulf in between. Where are we at this juncture right now?
Well, the accident hasn't progressed to the point that the reactor core has been released from the pressure vessel, and that makes it far less bad than Chernobyl. But on the other hand, it's a lot worse than 3 Mile Island because, for one thing, there's 3 reactors involved. For another, since the containments at these reactors are a lot smaller and less capable than the 3 Mile Island containment, they have had to vent a considerable amount of reactivity in the process of depressurizing the containment. So there's been a great deal more release.
Well, Chernobyl was, as I said, insanity because they didn't even have a containment structure. Obviously, the Japanese have containment structures here, and they have held so far. But what happens if there is a meltdown? Then would it approach anything near Chernobyl, or still that wouldn't be the case?
Well, in terms of spectacular energetic events, it will never be anything like, none of these reactors will be anything like Chernobyl. They don't have the mechanism for that neutronic excursion, that atomic bomb-like explosion that occurred there. But in terms of health effects, I'm sorry to say it could be worse.
Really?
Having the release at ground level as opposed to this incredible blast followed by a hot fire at Chernobyl will mean that the radioactive material is much more, where people live. At ground level, it would depend a lot on the weather, the wind directions, but it was actually fortunate for the Chernobyl event that so much of that radioactive material got launched very, very high into the atmosphere, to the stratosphere, in fact.
That's really interesting. I had not heard that before. So what does it mean to be at the ground level? Does that mean you can spread more, or it goes in deeper, and then you have to relocate the people because they can't settle there? What exactly is the implication of that?
Well, the biggest fear is that it will be lofted, the radioactive cloud will be lofted high enough that it can be transported to various population centers and then settle, either by gravity or through precipitation, rain or snow, and therefore end up having a very large dose right where people, a very large deposition right where people live. We're talking about this before the reactor vessel has even failed, but so it's real speculation, but it could be very, very bad.
Obviously, especially if it goes towards Tokyo, where there's such an enormous number of people. Now, at this point, there's apparently a fire at reactor number 4. How does that affect all of this?
Well, that fire and the events that are occurring in the spent fuel pool in reactor number 4 would be an important worldwide newsworthy event all by itself. The amount of radioactivity in these fuel rods is almost as much as are in the fuel rods that are in the reactors. Having a fire as a result of the draining down of that pool is a horrifically dangerous event.
So tell me about what your current assessment is. I mean, given all these fires, given, we were so worried about what was going to happen to reactor number 2, and it turns out something terrible did happen this morning. Now, reactor 4, which we didn't even expect, is on fire and the roof is cracked. At this point, what's the likelihood that we hit the worst case scenario?
Well, in terms of the 3 reactors that were operational and that have had problems being kept cool, we have to hope that the operators continue to be successful in getting water into those pressure vessels, water over the core, and continue to do so for many days. That's what's going to be necessary to keep that core damage progression from continuing. If they are unsuccessful, if they don't get enough water in any one of these 3 reactors, and the core material slumps to the bottom of the vessel, that's called an uncoolable configuration, and that decay heat in that fuel could cause the fuel to melt and eventually penetrate the reactor vessel steel.
So would you call that possible? Would you call it likely? I know we're far away and it's hard to determine from here, but I think a lot of people are wondering, how bad can this get? So where do you think it stands right now?
Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that it's likely. It's very hard to tell. We don't know where the water level is. It is possible. It's a lot more possible than I thought it was going to be 2 days ago.
Wow, that's interesting. It's getting worse in a lot of ways. So, Ken, how about the 50 to 70 people there right now trying to put out those fires and putting the water on, etc.? How much trouble are they in with being exposed to that much radiation?
Well, recently there was a contingent of 800 workers at the facility, and Tokyo Electric made the decision to pull most of those people once the radiation levels got to some of the levels that have been seen. Leaving 50 behind, no doubt volunteers who knew that they were taking their lives, putting their lives on the line, and I have a little doubt that many of those people will die, and wow. That's a sacrifice that they probably knew they were making.
That's an amazing story. We're going to come back to that story because those people are beyond brave. They're now thinking of bringing in reinforcements, and they're looking at retired people to come in. And you see the clear implication of that, partly because they're experts, partly because they're volunteering at that stage. It's an amazing story of heroism. Ken Bergeron, we really appreciate your expertise tonight. Thank you for coming out and talking to us.